So yeah, this all went down back in the summer of 2001. My buddy Mike and I, we were itching to get out from the city bustle, Just kind of hit the reset button. We decided on camping, but we're not these super outdoorsy, roughing it kind of guys. So we rented this cozy cabin up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, right on the edge of a small lake. Place was straight out of a postcard. Surrounded by these big old pine trees in the lake, man, it was crystal clear and teeming with fish. Perfect for what we had in mind, just lazing around with some fishing poles. After we spent the day out by the lake, we came back to the cabin to clean up. Evening rolled in cool and slow, and we settled in with a couple of beers, just listening to the radio and swapping stories about the good old days. Real chill, right? But then, out of nowhere, there was this knock on the door. We weren't expecting anyone, so I was naturally a bit sketched out. I peeked through the window and saw this middle aged lady standing there. She didn't seem like a threat, looked kind of disheveled, but harmless. So I opened the door a crack, and there she was, standing with this vacant look, eyes kind of staring into nothing. Hey, can I help you? I asked her. She stared straight ahead for a second before her eyes met mine, and she muttered, Do not open the door. Her voice was eerie, kind of like a warning. What? I was confused. Do not open the door. She repeated slowly, then just turned around and walked off down the trail, fading into the shadows. Gone. Just like that. I shut the door, turned to Mike, and his face was all, Dude, what just happened? We sat back down, but we were seriously freaked out, barely speaking, just going over that bizarre encounter in hushed tones. We had just about calmed down when bang! This loud thump on the door nearly gave us heart attacks. This time, when I sneaked a peek outside, there was this burly dude at the door, clutching something in his hand. Couldn't really see what it was, but it gave off bad vibes. I shouted through the door, What do you want? Just want to talk, he growled back. But man, the way he said it, no way was I opening up. He banged louder this time, and swear to God, I stumbled back a couple of steps. I yelled at him to go away, but he just kept at it. That's when I remembered. I had packed a hefty revolver, for any wild animal troubles while fishing. I grabbed it, tapped it against the window where he could see. He must have caught the hint because he turned and walked off. Shaking, I called the cops. The dispatcher's voice was stern. Under no circumstances open that door. They sent someone over pronto. When the cops arrived, they scoped out the area heavy. One officer came up and I described the dude. His face went pale. Man, you really lucked out. That guy, he killed 7 people tonight, including a family. My stomach dropped. Then I mentioned the lady from earlier. Turns out, she matched the description of the murdered family's mother. Chills, man, total chills. They kept searching, but eventually left. Next day, heard on the radio, they caught the guy. Turned out he was attacking people with a knife, just like what he held at my door. The drive home with Mike was just silent. We were both just there, trying to process the whole ordeal. How a ghost might have just saved our lives. Total madness, right? I'd just wrapped up my last semester, and the world seemed impossibly large and exciting from the stoop of my cramped college apartment. With a degree in hand and a job lined up that wouldn't start for a few months, I figured there was no better time to really see the country. Not like a tourist zipping by landmarks, but really soak it in, edge to edge. Believe it or not, at that point, the idea of hitchhiking across the states to visit my sister in South Dakota seemed not just practical, but adventurous. A real find yourself journey. I kept things light: a backpack, a few changes of clothes, and a well thumbed road atlas I'd found at a thrift shop. Ohio's familiar sights faded in the rear view of my mind as I hit the open road. I stuck my thumb out, trusting my clean cut appearance and a smile to get me rides. Not half a day in, the rumble of a semi pulling over broke my concentration. A weathered, old truck. It skidded slightly on the gravel as it stopped. Jogging up, I yanked the passenger side door open. Behind the wheel was an older man with a subtle, knowing smile, like he could tell a good tale or two. Hi, I'm Tim. I introduced myself, breathless from the short sprint. Marty, he simply returned, nodding for me to hop in, and thus began our shared stretch of road. Marty wasn't much for chatter, which was fine by me. I'd occasionally try to pry a story from him, but he seemed more interested in the road, eyes fixed ahead, only the odd nod or hum to acknowledge our coexistence. The ride was uneventful until we neared a large bridge. Out of nowhere, Marty muttered, "We're going to take a detour." I glanced around. The bridge looked perfectly fine to me. Anxiety nibbled at me as we veered off the main road, trundling over an older, narrower bridge a mile away before circling back to the highway. I didn't ask questions. Maybe I should have. Marty dropped me off near my intended stop as dusk painted the sky in strokes of orange and purple. We parted with a nod, and he drove away into the settling night. Later, in a small diner nursing a coffee, I watched the news flicker on the screen. The bridge we were meant to cross had been struck by a barge. Total collapse. A cold sweat gathered at my brow as I tried to wrap my head around the serendipity of it all. But nothing prepared me for the chill that crept down my spine when I stepped outside and caught sight of the local paper. A front page photo of Marty's truck and him. The headline took a moment to sink in. Local tragedy, truck driver loses life in crash. The date stamped on the incident. Yesterday. I stared at the paper longer than I cared to admit. Thoughts of the afterlife, of spirits and unfinished business. That stuff was always just stories to me. But there I was, standing in a barely lit street, reconsidering everything. How did Marty know to avoid that bridge? Was it a haunting forewarning, a saving grace from beyond? I couldn't say for sure. What I did know was that my view of the world, and perhaps the one beyond, had irrevocably changed. This is a story my grandfather told me many years ago, one that happened to him and my grandmother during their honeymoon. They were young and madly in love, and they set their hearts on a quaint Caribbean island for their vacation. Given that this was back in the 40s, just reaching their destination involved a considerable amount of effort. They booked a charming bungalow right on the beach, where the ocean whispered secrets to the sandy shores under the crest of the sun. Despite the beautiful beginning, my grandfather always said that there was an impending sense of change in the air, a prelude to an unexpected adventure. As they settled in, eager to explore the nightlife of a much larger island nearby, which was connected by a sturdy bridge, there was a sudden knock at the door. Standing outside was a wizened old man, his clothes bearing the marks of sea salt and time, much like a lighthouse keeper out of an old tale. Opening the door, my grandfather greeted him, only to be met with a stern warning. "Get off the island," the old man said cryptically. Perplexed, my grandfather questioned him, but the only response was the repeated admonition, "Get off the island or you'll die," before the man turned away and disappeared into the deepening dusk. Initially, they thought little of the strange encounter, dismissing it as the ramblings of a local eccentric. They proceeded with their plan and headed to the Big Island for the evening. As the night unfolded with laughter and dancing, a nagging sense of unease began to take root in my grandfather's mind. The old man's ominous words echoed over the music and chatter, growing louder in his consciousness. Heeding the call of his intuition, my grandfather persuaded my grandmother to stay overnight on the Big Island instead of returning to the bungalow. She agreed, partly amused by his sudden change of heart, chalking it up to an impulsive adventure on their honeymoon. That night, the storm came. A furious hurricane that raged across the island chain, merciless and unyielding. They learned the next day that had they returned to their bungalow, they would likely not have survived the night. When morning broke, the bridge to the small island was nothing but remnants washed away by the storm, and the island itself had been ravaged, left almost unrecognizable. My grandparents were shaken but unharmed, grateful for the unplanned change in their itinerary. Curious about the old man, they asked the locals who survived the storm. No one knew of him personally, but some nodded, familiar with the legend of an old lighthouse keeper who appeared to warn folks of impending disasters. Even decades later, my grandfather often mused about the mysterious protector whose warning had saved their lives. It became a story of luck, love, and a lesson in heeding warnings from unexpected sources, a tale that resonated through generations, reminding us of the thin lines between legend, life, and the inexplicable twists of fate.